And Layne, I've been paying attention to you online for a long time. One of the things you do a great job with is just calling bullshit on, I mean, you love to call bullshit, clearly. But whenever people are overstating claims or people get ridiculous, and I think this is one of the things that is a problem with any diet where people get really enthusiastic about it. That becomes an ideology, whether it's the ketogenic diet or the carnivore diet or the, fill in the blanks, vegan diet. People decide this is the end all be all. It's going to cure cancer, make you smarter, the dick's going to grow a foot. All these things are going to happen. And you do a great job of calling bullshit on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not anti-keto. I'm not anti-vegan. I'm anti-bullshit. And one of the problems we have is nutrition is replacing religion for a lot of people. So you find something that you identify with, and then people start to try to say, because they identify with that movement, or like, for example, vegans, they identify with, many of them, protection of animals. Not my job to judge their ethics on that sort of thing. But then they kind of try to backtrack to find the science to support them as well. And they pick and choose, and this is guilty of all groups, not just vegans. This is also a lot of ketogenic diet zealots, carnivore diet, whatever have you. If it has the word diet, there's zealots out there who are going after it. And I will stick up for, I've stuck up at a scientific conference for the ketogenic diet. We were having a roundtable about something different. And somebody said, well, we know that the ketogenic diet impairs exercise performance in endurance athletes. And I said, I don't think that's necessarily true. It's pretty ambivalent or ambiguous as to whether or not it does. It seems to be kind of individual. Mm-hmm. But on the whole, on the average, it doesn't seem to impair exercise performance. So it's kind of what you like. But when you have people who, like a Gary Taubes who says, well, calories don't matter. It's all carbohydrates. That sort of thing, or the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. I mean, the research is, you're able to do a lot of hand waving about insulin and, will you burn so much fat when you're on a high fat diet, which is true, by the way. You burn a lot of fat, but what they don't talk about is that it's overall fat balance, how much fat you store versus how much fat you burn. And when you're on a high fat diet, you store a lot of fat. You also burn a lot of fat. The overall caloric balance is what determines whether or not you will have net storage or net deposition. And the same thing for a high carb diet as well. This idea that with high insulin, it just completely shuts down all fat burning everywhere. That's just not true. Now, if you have high carbohydrate, you will burn less fat, but you're also storing less fat as well. And again, the net caloric balance is going to be what determines how much you store, because you don't really store carbohydrate as fat for most people. They did a study overfeeding women where they overfed them 50% above their caloric maintenance. And they found that of 282 grams of fat that they stored during a day in adipose, only 4 grams came from carbohydrate. 278 came from fat.
So glucose, what about fructose? So fructose causes, we think, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So that could be, that's de novo lipogenesis is higher with fructose. And you think about people consuming it in liquid drinks, 100 to 200 grams a day, which is not uncommon, even for my wife, not uncommon.
So fructose does seem to have a little bit of different hepatic metabolism. But I was actually across the hall from a professor who was doing a lot of the research on fructose and obesity and fatty liver disease. And even he came to the conclusion that if you overfeed fructose and it creates a caloric surplus and you're overfeeding fructose, then you can have some wonky stuff start to go on.
Relative to other macros.
Right.
Try to keep this right next to your face. Sorry.
Got it.
That's what she said.
Layne is so powerful.
I talk loud and a lot.
It's good.
So if you're doing that, if you're creating that caloric surplus, what you find is when you're in net storage, when you're driving more nutrients into adipose and sometimes liver, depending on metabolism, but it takes a lot of fructose to do that and a caloric surplus. You start to create a lot of wonky stuff going on. The mitochondria starts to become dysfunctional, and people make a big deal about, we have claimed now that everything causes obesity and type 2 diabetes. For first, it was fats, then carbohydrates, and there's actually professors out there who actually will claim that protein gives you diabetes.
Can I stop you for a second?
Yeah.
What do you mean the mitochondria becomes dysfunctional? How does the mitochondrial, how does that happen?
Okay, so I'm going to state for everybody that I'm going out on a limb. This is my opinion.
Okay.
If you look at the research on obesity and diabetes, what happens is you have everything start to elevate in the bloodstream. So if you measure, like, there was a professor who thought that branched-chain amino acids were causing obesity because they were elevated in the bloodstream during type 2 diabetes. Well, yeah, branched-chain amino acids are elevated. So is fatty acids, so are triacylglycerides, so is glucose. So is it really those things causing it, or is it possible that when you are overfeeding relative to what you burn, relative to that turnover, that mitochondria start to become dysfunctional, probably a lot due to inactivity. And the mitochondria is, as we call it, the powerhouse of the cell, as you probably learned in high school biology or whatever they taught it to you as. That is where everything fluxes through. So that is where you're creating ATP. That's where you're burning through lipids, carbohydrates, that sort of thing. If that becomes dysfunctional and you're not getting enough flux, enough pull through that mitochondria, what happens is you start to back up every part of metabolism. So all the metabolic byproducts, almost all of them, inhibit everything within the cell.
There's a metabolomic signature for that. And an epiphenomenon, if you want to call it that, would be elevated branched-chain amino acids. Could be a consequence of that in some people. Yeah.
So these byproducts, these metabolic byproducts, because you're not fluxing enough through the cell, they start accumulating within the cell and start to inhibit the Krebs cycle, glycolysis. And so everything starts backing up to the point where you also start inhibiting the insulin receptor. And now you have glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids also backing up to the point where they start to overspill into the bloodstream. And you see this accumulation of all of them in the bloodstream in type 2 diabetes. And I actually think that, again, me going out on a limb, that obesity doesn't cause type 2 diabetes and type 2 diabetes doesn't cause obesity, that they develop in concert from the same problem, which is overfeeding underactivity. So a lot of it is about how much nutrients you're fluxing into cells versus how much energy you're creating, fluxing them through the cell and out. So when you're overfeeding, whether it be carbohydrate, fat, you're fluxing more energy in than you can dispose of, and now you have to do something with it. Well, when you do that much to it and mitochondria start to become dysfunctional, you start to not have enough places to put it away, and it starts spilling into the bloodstream, and now you cause all kinds of problems.
So one of the things that we really wanted to talk about here is high carb versus low carb, because this is just a giant point of contention today in nutrition, especially in terms of athletes with performance in mind. It's a big factor, whether or not high carb or low carb is the way to go. And there's a lot of zealots on both sides, and there's a lot of bullshit, and there's a lot of online experts. And one of the great thing about bringing you two guys in here is because you could really actually explain the science behind it. Now, you've been great, Layne, at pointing out that it's not a magic bullet. And and so many people like to sort of stress it that way, that they like to portray a ketogenic diet as this is it, this is the end all be all, I figured out what to do, this is the way everyone should be eating. You don't think so?
I don't think so, because if you look at the weight loss problem in our society, and I'm writing a book called Fat Loss Forever where I talk about this in detail, we don't have a weight loss problem. 6 out of every 7 people are able to lose a significant amount of body weight in their life who are obese or overweight. The problem is the weight regain statistics are absolutely terrifying. Within 1 year, 70% will put it all back on. Within 2 years, it's 85%. Within 3 years, it's 95%. So that means diets have a 95% failure rate. And of those people, 1/3 to 2/3 will add more than they originally lost. And this gets kind of into yo-yo dieting, and I talk about that as well. But the real problem is that people don't pick something that's sustainable for them. All the research, if there's one bit of research out there that we have that shows how to create lasting weight loss, and you look at the people who are the 5% who actually keep it off, it's that they pick something that's sustainable, whether it be ketogenic, whether it be low carb, high or low fat, whatever it is, vegan, something that they can sustain and make a lifestyle. Because if you look at meta-analyses, for our listeners, meta-analyses are kind of a study of studies. So researchers take studies that have similar parameters, and they kind of lump them together. And they look at, okay, what's the consensus amongst these studies? And they have advanced statistics they use to run this. If you look at low carb versus low fat, there's no difference in adherence overall on the whole. There's no difference. And there's no difference in weight loss. There's no difference in blood lipids, even glycemic control. So there was a study where they, meta-analysis of, I think it was 23 studies, over 3,000 people, where they looked at, okay, if you control calories, so calories are equated, does low carb versus low fat make a difference on weight loss, glycemic control, those sorts of things?
Not necessarily the ketogenic diet. So by definition, we have an objective biomarker that defines the ketogenic diet. It's the only diet that actually has something that you can measure in your blood to say you're on this diet. And when your ketone levels are elevated, that confers many different benefits that I believe can enhance adherence to the diet.
Before we get into the woods here, I want to clarify one thing.
Yep.
The difference between someone being on a diet and being able to sustain it and not being able to sustain it and gaining all that weight back, isn't that a discipline issue?
Well, partly, but we kind of have to start looking at, okay, if we go in, let me recircle. We have to find what requires the least amount of discipline for somebody to stick to, because discipline is while some people have more, some people have less, it is a finite resource. So when do we normally find that people like kind of drop off whatever they're doing? It's when they're stressed out, work's stressing them out, they're going through a divorce, those kinds of things, right? That's where our discipline kind of wanes, because we're trying to be so disciplined for this other thing, and it's draining us. So what happens with diet is, in people who are busy, people who have a lot of stress in their life, that's where they really start overeating. So we have to find something that I look at it as, let's find something that requires the minimal amount of discipline for a person, so that when your life goes to absolute shit, you can still stick to it. And so for some people, that is a very, very individual thing. And they see this in the dietary studies, that what works for one person to create a deficit and sustainable isn't the same way for another person. And Dom even commented on this about his wife, Chilla. She does much better on a higher ratio of carbohydrates to fat.
Yeah, I mean, early on, it was obvious that she wasn't going to change her diet. The time that we met, like 10 years ago almost, I was really getting into this, and I really felt that, for me at least, but she would stop at Checkers and get a burger and with a sugary drink, and she's tremendously carb intolerant. She was very skinny as a kid, and she tolerates carbohydrate. She's very carbohydrate tolerant.
Yes.
Did I say intolerant? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and if the diet low carb, I feel, and ketogenic, putting it under that umbrella, works, I think, for up to 25 to 30% of people, especially if they're carbohydrate intolerant. And I believe that it does that by virtue of elevating ketones, shifting the neuropharmacology of the brain. For example, it works through ghrelin. There's new science emerging right now showing that appetite regulation is influenced positively by nutritional ketosis in ways that we're just starting to learn now.
Well, you can certainly feel it. It's one of the weirder things about the ketogenic diet. When you're in that state, all of a sudden you're just not hungry the same. There's not an overwhelming need for food.
Yeah, I haven't had anything to eat today. I mean, when I was eating massive plates of pasta 25 years ago, and I went to this long without food, I would start getting shaky. I would have a hypoglycemic response, and I'm completely resilient to that. And that has major implications for military personnel being keto adapted, not just for performance, preventing seizures, and I think for cognitive function too. But it's very liberating. So meal frequency is not an issue. So if you're in austere environments where you have limited food availability, that becomes a major issue. And if you're working as a scientist and you can't, you're working with animals, you're doing experiments, you don't have time to eat, I need to maintain that cognitive function. I need to be sharp, with limited food. So it worked very good for me throughout my professorship, getting tenure and things like that, where I could just put more time and energy into my work without having to stop, prepare a meal, eat a meal, clean up. Like, I think I wasted a lot of time doing that when I was eating 5 to 6 meals a day.